Hey guys, I just wanted to make a short video today going over the difference between flow and pressure, and this will help you a lot when you're designing a sprinkler system, when you're adding sprinkler heads or reconfiguring things, or when you're diagnosing low pressure problems. All of these come down to flow and pressure, and they're different things. Flow, pressure, velocity of water are different things, and you need to understand all of these concepts in order to make the right decisions when it comes to how sprinkler heads are configured and how we deal with low pressure problems. So flow, we measure in gallons per minute or gallons per hour, but it's generally, in general, flow is just going to be a volume over a time, okay? And flow is generally in mathematics and engineering stuff denoted with a Q, okay? So our flow is volume over time, okay? Now pressure is going to be force. Okay, that's the pressure, right? Literally pressure with which the water is pushing. Okay, so it's going to be force over a measurement. Okay, so over an area generally. So that's denoted with P equals F over A, and we can talk about that in a sec. But it's usually with PSI is how we do it in the United States. Or sometimes you can do it with bar, and that's the European way, like centimeters and inches kind of thing. And we also want to talk about feet of head, which is the elevation stuff, and that's actually how we're measuring it with elevation and how we measure with pumps. So if you ever put a pump on an irrigation system, you're going to be looking at head and what's called head loss as well. And so that's kind of what we want to talk about. So pressure is force over area. So area, so usually that's pounds over square inches, right? That's what PSI is. Now on the other side, volume over time. We can change that and manipulate that however we needed to. We could do volume in terms of liters or ounces or something of water over days or months or years, right? You can do that, or seconds or milliseconds, whatever. So these are just the general units that we use is force over area being pounds over square inches, and volume over time is for flow. All right, so flow is the amount of water moving through, the volume per time, and pressure is the force with which the water is pressing. Now, it's important to understand pressure comes in two forms. We measure in two ways. We have static pressure and we have dynamic pressure. Okay, dynamic. And static, what that means is it's not moving. So the water is stuck in the pipe and it's pressing in all directions. It's essentially just looking for a way out. All right, that's what water wants to do. It wants to go from high pressure to low pressure. Always wants to go from high pressure to low pressure. Now, outside of a sprinkler head is really low pressure. That's why we move from in to out of a sprinkler head. Okay, is because we have that high to low pressure. Now, dynamic pressure is as the water moves through and outlets. Sometimes it's called residual pressure as well, because it's what pressure we have, or operating pressure. It's what we have while the system is running, while we actually have things going. So we can measure static pressure by, I'll show in a little bit, by just putting a pressure gauge on something without water leaving the system. And then we can measure dynamic pressure by checking that while things are running, okay? Okay, so it's important to understand there are mathematical concepts underlying all of this, but we're not really going to get into those in this video. So later we'll go over it, but we want to later on talk about the Bernoulli principle or equation and the Venturi effect, which combined just give us a lot of information about how pressure works. It's how we know how airplanes fly. Like it gives us a ton of engineering type stuff. But in sprinklers, really the most important thing that we understand from it is that as we go to lower pipe sizes, the gallons per minute doesn't change, but the velocity will increase because we're still going to get more through there, but it's going to be in a smaller area, so the water has to move faster, essentially. Does that make sense? So anyway, basically the lesson behind these equations that we'll go over later is that water, when it is constricted, it moves faster, which is why putting your thumb on the end of a hose makes the water go further, because you're having that velocity increase. But our pressure is actually going to decrease when that happens because of these effects, and also because of friction loss, which is the water rubbing up against the edges of the pipe. Technically, in engineering terms, it converts the hydraulic energy of the water into thermal energy into like it's heat, right? So we just lose pressure that way, okay? Now I want to talk about feet of head and elevation changes and how that affects pressure, which you guys already understand pretty well probably. But let's say this is 100 feet of elevation from the bottom of this water tower down to where it gets into the ground, all right? We're gonna say that this area here is another 50 feet, and we're gonna call this area here, we're gonna call it, oh, that went to an eraser, we're gonna call that 10 feet, okay? And then we're gonna call this area here another 10 feet. So altogether, this is gonna be 20, okay? But these will kind of cancel out, to be honest, all right? Because we're going up and then back down 10 feet. And realistically, this is probably lower, but we can ignore that. So when we're dealing with water pressure, converting from head to pressure, we have feet of head times times 0.433. And that's what gives us our PSI. So if we have 100 plus 50, we have 150 feet of head, and we're going to multiply that by 0.433 to give us our PSI output that we're expecting. So over 150 feet times 0.433, that's going to be 43.3 plus 21.5-ish, and we're going to be around 64.8 down here at the house, we'll say, for this example, okay? So that's our PSI. That we get it from elevation, but if we added a pump here, that would spin the water around, add centrifugal forces, and basically increase so that we get additional feet of head, essentially, is the way that they do it. Now, I also really quick want to go over sprinkler heads and how many we have and how that affects things as well, okay? So let's say we've got these sprinkler heads, we've got water coming here out of the basement, goes to our backflow, goes to our valves, and then goes through to all of these heads, for example, okay? Well, if we add another sprinkler head down here, we get the additional pipe and we get the sprinkler head itself. Now, all of these pipes are going to have friction loss. Every fitting gives us friction loss. Every valve gives us friction loss. The backflow, the distance upwards between the stop and waste or the basement shutoff and up to the backflow gives us a friction loss. If we go up and then down, all we're getting is friction loss. We're not actually getting the head change, if that makes sense, because it evens out. But every movement adds some friction loss. And there are friction loss charts that manufacturers make that we can access and use for calculations of system designs. But generally, in a small residential sprinkler system, friction loss is going to be pretty negligible. Okay, so I'll write that here. Friction loss is in big letters. I don't know if I spelled that right, but not very important to keep track of unless we're going a super far distance. Every 100 feet, you'll see with like 1-inch PVC, schedule 40, like you can look that up. You'll see we're gonna lose a few feet of pressure, essentially. But it's not gonna make a huge difference, especially when we're doing small residential stuff, okay? So that's everything that I wanted to go over in here was flow and pressure, and that they interact, right? So as we increase flow, we will decrease pressure, which means adding a head will reduce the pressure. And let's go into my backyard now so we can do a little experiment and we can see actually how this changes. Because it's not always in a set amount. It's not like if you add 2 gallons per minute, it's automatically going to decrease by 10 psi. It's not like even give and take like that. It changes based on the water source, based on the piping, based on the layout, based on a lot of things. And so it's good to get readings on the systems that you're working on by doing what we call a 5-gallon bucket test and a PSI gauge reading with both static and dynamic pressure so that you can see exactly how much water we're using, okay? And what our system's capacity is, all right? So all in all, that's everything that we wanted to go over in this demonstration. So now let's go to my backyard and get started. We are now in my beautiful backyard, and what we're going to be doing is playing with the nozzles, playing with the way that this zone is configured so that we can experiment and see how different changes change the dynamic pressure of the system, and maybe we can look at static pressure as well. All right, let's turn this zone on and see what we've got. So I just turned my zone on. We've got 8 heads on it, and you can see each one is not popping up all the way, and you've probably seen this out in the field before. They start to come up and then they go back down when you try to pull them up. They're not sealing, and it's just never gonna work, right? This is because we're demanding too much of the system. So what we can do is, just for our learning's sake, let's close off some of these van nozzles so that we have less water demanded. Oh, you see them starting to pop up? Let's do one more. I bet once we get this one, we're gonna be golden. Now these guys are popping up and actually spraying where they're supposed to. So I've closed all of these off except for that one. You can see they're all sticking up really, really well because the water is actually pushing them up. But this guy now is misting because there's so much water now going to it, right? Because we've got a whole zone powering one head. So let me close that off and we'll do some pressure readings. Before we do the readings though, one thing that I wanted to note really quick, when I turn this off, now that all of these are closed, this helps you to understand a little bit more static pressure. Now the zone is off, but all of our heads are still popping up. If we can get that to focus, they're all still popped up, right? And they're not actually going to go down because the static pressure isn't changing with no outlet anywhere. The water can't escape anywhere, so that static pressure is holding that in. The only way to deal with that, if we open this up, now they'll all pop down. Now they're all down because we opened up that nozzle, gave it an outlet for the pressure to actually change. Now I've set my nozzles aside and put a pressure gauge in so that we can see actually how much pressure we're getting when things happen, when things turn on. So go to zone 1, hold that down to turn it on. It's starting, and we'll see these pop up. Whoop, there it goes. And we can see that pressure changed, right? So we're hovering around 78-ish PSI. So let's open up some nozzles and see what changes now. Remember, this is static pressure because nothing is going out. And so it's just sitting there, right there, close to 80, 78, 79-ish. And that's because almost no water is going out. So because these are spurting out just a little bit, this isn't technically true static pressure, but it's as close as we're gonna get today. Now I opened up this head in the corner, and you can see it's spraying like crazy. But let's look and see what changed here. You can see now we're down closer to 60. So having one of these 12 vans that's open to just under 180 is creating a decrease by almost 15 PSI. Now I opened that one, and let's see what changed more. Now we're down to almost 40. So we're losing like 18 PSI per head, which is just crazy. So we've got some issues here that we need to work around, right? If we do that, we're gonna see if we're losing like 20 PSI per head that we open, then really we're gonna be able to open 1, 2 more, and this is gonna be down close to 0. And then these aren't gonna be able to open at all because we're not gonna have enough dynamic pressure. That one only took us down by maybe 12, and we're up to like 28, 29. Let's go over and do this guy as well, and I'll open it so that it's not actually hitting me at the pressure gauge, but keep it at close to 180. Now our dynamic pressure has settled down closer to 19. We need to have about 20 PSI of dynamic pressure for these to operate correctly. And open this guy up, and our dynamic pressure now is like 5 PSI. Now you can see they're starting to retract back into the spray bodies. And so if we go over to our PSI, look at that. We have nothing, absolutely nothing. All right, so I've gone ahead and replaced all of these with MP rotators. So let's go on over and turn on zone 1 really quick and see. These are gonna pop up a lot faster, I think, this time compared to before. And we've got all of them spraying. They're not adjusted where they should be, but now with our MP rotators, which have a lot less flow demanded, we actually have it closer to, let's see if we can get this to focus. There we go, 60 PSI. So minus this one, our whole system is operating on about 60 PSI, which is gonna be a lot better for our actual operation. So you can see we increased the pressure by 60 whole PSI by just swapping out those nozzles with MP rotators. So I've set everyone to 90 degrees, and we can see we're closer to like 64, 65, depending on the angle that you look at it. But we've got much better dynamic pressure now. So obviously we don't want these to be shooting only 90 degrees, but the point of this is to show that we can reconfigure things in the system. By reconfiguring it, we increase the available pressure and the capacity for us to run the sprinklers the way that we want to. Now, there's a caveat to this, that sometimes you can't just put MPs on, right? Sometimes you're going to need to actually physically change the structure of the system and split some zones apart, make some big changes, cap some heads, but that gives you a more visual, like numerical example of how we deal with these low pressure problems. Now, of course, the same thing would happen if we were, instead of putting MPs in, if we had a leak and we were fixing our leak. Well, obviously that's going to close an outlet, and the more we do that, the more pressure can go in other directions.